Good morning, YouTube. Bubba's Fabrication here. I'm going to be showing you guys how to do an oil change on a 2015 Ford Explorer today. This is going to be start to finish, all the tools that you need, everything that you need to know. This is the non-EcoBoost motor, so the naturally aspirated motor, the 3.5 liter. Let's get into it. Okay, so the tools that you're going to need is actually pretty simple, to be honest with you. So we're going to start off with a 15mm box end wrench here. This one happens to be a ratchet wrench, but or gear wrench. You really do not need this. You just need a 15mm wrench. So that's first tool. You're also going to need an oil filter wrench. Now these, you can get by without it with a few tricks. I don't recommend it, but if you're in a pinch, you can actually use a screwdriver. Say you're out in the middle of nowhere and you have no access to one, you need to do for some reason an oil change. You can actually use a flathead or a Phillips screwdriver and a hammer. You can hammer it through the oil filter and spin it off that way. There's no reason to do that when you have the proper tools, so I highly recommend getting an oil filter wrench. If you don't have one, you also want to make sure you get the right size for what it is that you're going to be doing. They're you know, fairly adjustable to what size that you need, but there's some that just are way too large on the small filters and vice versa. So what I recommend is, if you're going to get everything you need for your oil change, get your oil filter first. It's for your vehicle, and check to make sure that you're going to be able to clamp down on it with your oil filter pliers. That's going to be super important to be able to make sure that you get the oil filter off properly without damaging anything. So obviously oil filter pliers. We've got our box end 15mm wrench here. We've got our oil filter. I happen to use Amsoil pretty much religiously on everything that I own. While I'm there, for most things, like for example this vehicle, I use the Amsoil filters. Some of the other stuff I use OEM filters depending on what it is. But here's your filter. Obviously you want to pick up one of those. You're also going to need to pick up roughly 6 quarts of oil. Obviously check it on your dipstick, make sure you're good to go before you go on down the road, which we'll show you how to do. But I've got 6 quarts of Amsoil XL. This is their baseline synthetic. This is the 520. I always recommend running the 520 in the Explorers as well. It seems to do well, and that's what's recommended from the factory. So that's what we're gonna run today. You're also gonna need a few rags and a funnel to pour the oil when you're finished up. And recommended, you're also going to need a oil pan so that you can drain your oil into the pan. I just so happen to have this one. This one's a little bit big for what we need here, but I also have diesel trucks and stuff that we work on all the time, so this is what I've got. Make sure a lot of oil drain pans are 5 quarts. You definitely don't want to use a 5-quart oil pan when you're draining out 6 quarts. Keep that in mind. And another tool that I use religiously, basically on everything that I do, whether it be under the hood or under the vehicle, is a Milwaukee hood light. This is not required to do your oil change. It just makes things a lot easier to do when you have light on the subject. So this is pretty cool to have. I'm actually going to be doing a review on it here pretty soon, so stay tuned for that. But this is one of my favorite tools. Again, this is not required for your oil change. It's just recommended by me because I might be a Milwaukee snob just a little bit. Just a heads up. So, anyways, let's get into it. Okay, so I always start off on top of the vehicle under the hood. Obviously there's some things that need to be finished up here. So I've obviously got my light hooked up. Again, this is an optional thing, but it makes everything pretty well lit, so that's nice. What I start off with is I always go ahead and take the oil filter cap off of the motor. As you can see, if you're looking at your motor from the top, you can see you've got your cover here, your Ford emblem. It's going to be just off to the left. It's got a cap that says 5W20 on it. It's got some yellow writing. You can see that here, so that's the cap that we're going to be taking off. Typically, I'll just put it upside down on the cowl right here, or just somewhere where it's not gonna make a mess and it's out of the way. So you can set it there. I also grab a shop rag and I always pull out the dipstick, wipe it off really well so you don't get oil anywhere, and I also set it up in the cowl. Just might be out of frame on the video, but I just set it right on the cowl here. And what that does is when you're draining the oil, it adds a nice vent to the top of the motor. It lets the oil drain out freely. Now, one thing I forgot to mention towards the beginning of the video is it's also important to warm your car up slightly before you do the oil change. Oil, obviously, as it gets warmer, it gets thinner and it's gonna drain out better than if it's sludgy and thick and really cold at the top of your motor. Now, you know, be careful to get it too hot. You know, use your judgment on this. You know, if things are too hot to touch, then don't touch them. But what I usually do is just let it idle for a few minutes, just get everything kind of moving around. You could take it on a short drive. You just don't want to start burning yourself, but you definitely want the oil at least warm when you do an oil change. So now that we're at the top of the motor, we've got our oil cap off, we've got our dipstick out, and we're gonna move on to the bottom of the vehicle at this point. As we go underneath the vehicle, I am basically standing directly at the front of the vehicle. I'm gonna go directly down and towards the passenger side, and we're gonna go just underneath the front of the vehicle here, and you're gonna see this plate. Now again, this is, if you're standing at the front of the vehicle, it's, you know, maybe 6 or 8 inches to the left of your Ford emblem just as you hit the bottom. Now you will see these plates, this plate under here, and there's 2 rings that you're gonna have to turn on this. One is right here. You can see this tab. We're going to turn it counterclockwise about a quarter, maybe a little over a quarter of a turn, and you're gonna see this plate drop down on that end, okay? This plate has 3 places where we're gonna do this. So the next one is just over to the left. It's gonna be difficult for me to get on camera here, but it's up in this hole here. And you're gonna do the same thing. It also goes counterclockwise. And about half a turn or so, and it should drop out. And then we're gonna drop this plate and set it straight down on the ground. Just like so, very carefully. And I'm actually gonna move around behind the passenger tire, and we're gonna get the next one. So we are now on the passenger side of the vehicle. I'm gonna go just behind the tire here, and we're gonna see this plate again that we dropped down at the front. Now, if you look closely, right here, you're gonna see the other tab right there. So we're gonna go after that tab now, and this whole plate is gonna drop straight down. It also goes counterclockwise, and you might need to lift up on the front of the plate slightly in order to take the pressure off this to get it out. And it's gonna drop down just like that. I always just move this way off to the side where it's out of my way. So this is the skid plate we just pulled off the vehicle. The 2 ones that we started with are up here. Those are towards the front of the vehicle. There was 2 that we spun counterclockwise on both sides. We're looking at the motor side of this, and then under here is the bottom side. So we're looking at it just like as it would sit on the car. When we went behind the passenger side front tire, this is the one that we were working on here. Again, these all go counterclockwise. If I rotate this over, you're gonna see the side that we saw on the camera just a minute ago. So this one's the one that's behind the tire. It's gonna go counterclockwise. These are the 2 that are up at the front. This is the one that was easy to see, and this one's up kind of in a small little hole, but you'll see it. This is, again, towards the passenger side of the vehicle. So we are ready to undo the drain plug underneath the vehicle. I actually just slipped the drain pan underneath there. You'll see that here in just a second, but before we go under the vehicle, there's a few things you're gonna wanna grab. So your 15mm wrench, let's take that. You're gonna wanna take your oil filter wrench, a couple rags more than likely, and it might not be a bad idea to also take your oil filter with you down there so that you don't have to get up again. So let's take all of these things underneath the vehicle and let's get started. All right, so we're underneath the vehicle right now. You can see my drain pan. I've also got my light, my Milwaukee light, and which again, any light will do just well. If you look to my right, I'm under the passenger side of the vehicle, just behind the front tire. So passenger front tire. This drain plug that we're looking at right here is about equal with the tire the passenger tire. So you're gonna look straight over from your tire. It's underneath the skid plate that we removed. And the actual oil pan is actually just kind of right in this area next to the exhaust here. So we're just right here. Now this again is the 15 millimeter. That's where your 15 millimeter is gonna come in hand. So what we're gonna do is, my drain pan is a pretty tall one, so it's difficult for me to loosen this bolt with the drain pan underneath because my wrench kind of hits. So I've scooted my drain pan forward just a little bit. It's not going to catch any oil where it's at, so I'm going to have to slide it back. Yours may be the same, or if you have a smaller drain pan, you're probably not going to have this problem. Either way, it's completely okay and we'll get through without it. So I'm going to put my box end wrench on this 15 millimeter. The same thing, we're going to go counterclockwise or lefty-loosey to get this undone. Now, being that I am filming right now, I'm going to do the best that I can to get this on film, but I also need to make sure I don't spill any oil. So let's see how this goes. So I just got my bolt loose with my wrench. See, I can move it by hand, but we're not leaking any oil. I'm gonna pull my drain pan in front of it now. It's gonna be kind of challenging to see. So we wanna catch that oil that's gonna come down. My drain pan's now in front of it. We're gonna just spin this oil plug right off. It's hard to see right now, but one thing I wanna make sure you guys don't do as well is catch your drain plug. Don't drop it in your oil. So again, this is kind of hard to see, but we've got the oil draining out of that hole up there. Again, this is a little bit of a challenge to film, but you can see that oil is just draining out right now. It's not so hot that it's scalding me, but it's nice and warm because we let the car warm up. So again, we'll let this drain out. We'll get the oil plug back in there, everything wiped down, and we'll move on to the oil filter, which is also underneath the vehicle. As you can see, and I know it might be a little bit difficult to see, but our drain plug up at the top is still out, and our oil is basically come down to a drip. It is just barely dripping now, and how long you let this sit is up to you. It also depends on, a lot of factors, how hot it is, so on and so forth, but I would say probably a good 5 to 7 minutes is a good time frame to let it drip. Now that we've come to a drip, I've also got my drain plug cleaned up just with my rag. I've wiped it all down, cleaned it up so it's nice and clean. I'm gonna go ahead and insert that back into my drain hole here. You also might want to wipe this down to make sure there's no junk on it, but go ahead and put your drain plug back in here. And once we've got it pushed in, I'm gonna reach my rag up in there and wipe all of this off before I move my drain pan out of the way, just so we don't get any more drips. And then since my oil filter is in front of this, I'm actually just going to scoot my oil drain pan just forward. We'll get on this with a wrench. It doesn't take very much to get this tight. In fact, it's just a nice snug where it's not loose, but you also don't want to over tighten it and strip anything out. So I'm just going to wipe this all down really well. If you'd like to wipe it down further, spray it with some brake cleaner or whatever it might be and wipe it, that can work as well, but this is going to be good for me. And we're actually going to move to the front of the vehicle. So if you look at your drain pan, we're just going directly forward. We're just going to scoot that drain pan up there, and I'm actually going to go just towards the front of the vehicle, and we'll get that oil filter pulled off. So right now we're going almost directly to the center of the vehicle underneath, but towards the front. So we're going to go straight down. And if you look right in front of the drain pan, there's white looking thing there. That's going to be your oil filter right there. So we're going to take that off with our oil filter pliers that we talked about earlier in the video. There's going to be quite a few steps to this right here and things that you're going to want to pay attention to. So as you can see, this is actually a Motorcraft oil filter that's on there now. This is the same thing, righty-tighty, lefty-loosey. So we're gonna go ahead and loosen it up. If you can see right now, my drain pan is pushed out of the way for right now, but as soon as we get this loosened up, we're gonna swing the drain pan right underneath that oil filter. For those of you that are wondering, and I will actually put this in the description as well, the stock or OEM oil filter for this vehicle is an FL500S, just in case you're wondering. But we're gonna go ahead and pull this off now. So again, righty-tighty, lefty-loosey. And if you can see, I've got this loose with the tool, so I can actually pull my drain pan underneath, which is also going to block your view. But now that it's loose, we're gonna go ahead and undo this oil filter. with the drain pan underneath it. That way we don't make a mess underneath the vehicle. I have a special drain pan where I can actually put this oil filter in there upside down, which is what we're gonna do. Some of you, if you have a shallow drain pan, you can just set it in there as well. So that's what we've done. Now this one, you're gonna kind of definitely get some oil on your hands. I don't know if you can see, but pretty dirty here. If you do it fast, sometimes you can get less oil, but just expect to get a little dirty here. So I'm gonna let this drain for a minute, and then I'm gonna show you a few tips to check on your mounting plate and your spindle where your oil filter mounts to. But I wanna let this drain so that there's not a lot of oil in that area first. Okay, so now that we're just to a slow drip, there's a few things that I really wanna show you on the mounting plate, which is up here. I'm having a hard time getting the camera to focus, so if you can see this, I'll be extremely happy. But basically, here is what's called your mounting plate. This is where the seal on the oil filter mates to, and this part here is called your spindle, and that's what screws onto your oil filter to hold it. Now this spindle can come in and out, so we want to make sure that we righty-tighty, make sure by hand that it's tight, and we also want to wipe off our mounting plate and spindle and everything up in here just to make sure we're nice and clean, get it wiped down. And we also want to make sure that there's no O-ring left or seal left on this mounting plate. It's very common, especially not so much today, but you know, back in the day, that your oil seal from your oil filter would get stuck to the mounting plate. And when you put your new filter on there, the two seals don't seal together, ironically, and you have a massive oil leak underneath your vehicle. So just make sure that this is clean. It's metal here. You want to make sure that your spindle here is also tight. So those are the things that you want to check for. Another thing too is you want to get some new oil, some fresh oil from your oil that you purchased, and actually wipe down the seal on your new oil filter. It'll help it seal better, and it will also keep the seal from sticking, and it'll help your oil filter come off easier on your next oil change. So basically, you can see here in my oil filter, basically this black seal that I'm touching right here, you just want to wipe down very lightly with oil before you throw it up on your mounting plate up there. Once you've just gotten a little oil and wiped down your seal, it kind of looks like this, just a little shiny. And we're gonna go ahead and spin on our oil filter up here now. And this is something that you don't want to use the wrench on. You just want to get it hand tight, about as tight as you can get it with your hand. I always take my rag, wipe down all the edges, and just get it as tight as I can with my hand. And if you feel like you're a little weak with your hand, you can maybe give it an 1/8 or a 1/4 turn with your oil filter wrench. I don't recommend it, but if you feel like you can't get it quite tight enough with your hand, you can go just a little bit with an oil filter wrench. But really, just if you can muscle it up with your hand and get it tight, that should be good to go. So we're now done with our oil pan, so we can pull that out of here. We're done with our oil filter. We're also done with our drain plug. We put that back in there, so it's time to fill with oil. Now, one thing that we'll touch on towards the end is we need to put our skid plate back on here, but I personally don't like to put it on until I'm able to start the vehicle, check for leaks, make sure that everything went together correctly before I put that skid plate back on there, because that's gonna hide any leak that you may have. So let's go ahead and fill her up with oil, and we'll go from there. Okay, so it's time to pour the oil now. I always run through at this point a kind of a mental checklist on my mind. We don't want the oil running out of the bottom of the motor, so I always check, okay, I put the drain plug back in, I made sure it was tight. I also put the new oil filter on, we checked the base plate, made sure there's no seal, that's tight. So there's no reason at this point why I can't add more oil, and obviously we've drained the oil too because we pulled the drain plug out. We are ready to pour oil back in the motor. Again, we're using 5W20, it takes roughly 6 quarts. I'm gonna add 5.5, check the dipstick after I start it, and add right till we get up to that full level on the dipstick. We are going to go ahead and start pouring. I've got my funnel here, and we're gonna pour in that same place where we took our cap off earlier, our 5W20 cap. We're gonna go ahead and start pouring. This is time where you might wanna put some rags down where you're pouring so that you don't make a mess down in here. You can kind of drop some rags right there. But we're gonna go ahead and pour. Now, when you're buying oil, most of the time if you buy a large container like this, you're gonna get it in either 5 quarts or 1 gallon. This happens in total. I'm gonna pull this up and put my cloth underneath it so that I don't drop any oil. We can go ahead and spin our cap back on here. I am also going to put my dipstick back in. Go through a checklist in your mind again. Did you leave any cloths or rags down by your belt or anything down here? Make sure that you have everything out of the engine compartment so that you can easily start your motor and not have to worry about anything getting stuck. Also go through your mental checklist again. Double, triple check. You've got your oil plug back in, you've got your oil filter on tight, all and everything that could leak under the vehicle is sealed up. And you can go ahead and at this point start your vehicle. You can run it for 7 to 15 seconds. Just let the oil flow again, and then it's time to check the oil level here on the dipstick again. Okay, so we've started the vehicle for about 15 seconds or so. Shut it off. It doesn't matter if it sounds good or bad or whatever it means. Shut it off. Come over. Obviously, it sounds bad. There's probably something not right. Lack of oil pressure, so on and so forth. So you may want to take a look at. Make sure you go through that checklist again. Make sure that you've got oil. Always check under the vehicle. And make sure that there's no new oil spots. You can look up over near your oil filter to make sure that there's not any drippage or anything going on there. Now, keep in mind as you do an oil change, you're probably going to spill some oil on the floor. So if you see oil in the area that you spilt it, just make that determination whether or not that oil is from what you spilled earlier or if it's leaking out of the motor, whether it be at the drain plug or the oil filter, because remember, those are the only two places we touch. Now, as you're pouring oil into your where your oil cap is, your valve cover, it's also possible that you spilt oil in that area as you're pouring. Now, keep that in mind if you did, because if you see oil on the ground, it could potentially be from where you spilt it instead of it actually coming from the motor. So I've just taken a quick look under my engine. There's not any concerns that I have as far as new drippage whatsoever. We've let the engine run for roughly 15 seconds. I've let it sit for probably another 30 since I've been talking to you. Now is a good time to check your oil level. So we're gonna go ahead and pull the dipstick here. We're gonna wipe it off really well. We'll stick it in one more time. And as we pull it out, we want to check the level. We are dead center on the hash marks in between the top and the low mark. I don't know if you can see that very well. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and add the rest of that cord in there. That'll take us right up to that full mark, roughly. So we are spot on where we need to be. I'm going to go ahead and add that top portion back in there. And we will be good to go. So I'm going to pull my oil cap back off, set it off to the side, get my oil funnel here, and we're going to go ahead and pour the rest of that oil in at this time. Now, my recommendation as well is as you're driving over the next week, couple days, pull it back in your garage, pull it to a flat space, go to the gas station and check your oil again at that point, just to make sure that you're at that top point. Especially as your engine starts to get a few more miles on them, there could be some blow by, you could be using some oil at that point. So I recommend checking your oil, especially as your vehicle gets older, maybe every time you fill up. Every time you pull into the gas station, wait while your car fills up. Pop your hood open, check it. If you're driving a newer vehicle, that's not so much necessary, especially as we have miles and miles ahead in engineering than we were in the past, and cars have much tighter tolerances. They don't tend to use as much oil as the older vehicles do. But on your Ford Explorer, maybe once every 3-4 weeks, pull it into your garage, check your windshield wiper fluid, check your oil. It's just super important to keep up with your vehicles. So if you guys have any questions, comments, concerns, please leave them in the comments below. I'd be happy to answer any of those as you have them. We've completed our oil change at this time. There's not anything else that needs to be done other than me putting my oil cap back on here and checking the oil every now and then as we go forward. This is a super easy task to do. Keep in mind that after you started it, the only other thing left to do is to put your cover back on underneath. It goes on the exact same way that you take it off. It's a little challenging to do. As long as it is, I recommend starting up at the front, put your front two clips on, then moving to the back, put your back clip on that skid plate that's underneath the vehicle. Again, we're done at this time. There's nothing else to do. If you're curious on if this is something you should take on yourself, I highly recommend it. It's a very simple task, entry level to do. If this is your very first time, I would say you could do it within an hour. You're more talented with oil changes. This is obviously something that, you know, only your talent can tell you how fast that you can do it, but don't rush. Take your time, do it right. But I'd say if you've done a few oil changes before, you can do this inside of 30 minutes, no problem. So again, guys, I appreciate you watching. There's going to be tons more content coming this way, or your way, I should say. But thanks again. Bubba's Fabrication here. We'll see you next time.